So
Okay.
we're rolling.
Cool. Yeah, let's do this. You guys are good to go?
Yeah.
We're good? Yeah. All right. It's a bit warm here. We'll just get that there. All right.
All right, Dan. So,
Yep.
When did you first get into Warhammer?
Yeah, I think it was, I read, like as a child, I read The Hobbit, and I just realized how rad Thorin and all of those guys were, and just genuinely how crappy all of the elf characters were. And so from that point on, I just knew how bad any character, like when they're like alabaster skin, straight away it's a bad character. What was the question? Yeah, so basically, like if it's got pointy ears, it's really not something that you should ever trust or like ally yourself with. It's hard. I know it's hard to know because sometimes they wear hats or like that wanker braiding around the top, so you can't really tell like that they have those ears, but you can really tell from the features. And again, the biggest telling quality is if they don't have a beard, you can pretty much tell that they're not a dwarf or some kind of manling. And it's also like, it's a height thing. Like because they're so much taller usually, they're always looking down. That's another good way to tell. Sorry, I think I answered that one, yeah. Like knowing that there is like kind of the cut from different cloth. You've got one side of things, like just the size of the ears, I think is probably the other thing. Like when you've got such big elongated ears, those are ears designed for eavesdropping. Like that's not the kind of ear that a trustworthy person has. There's a level of trust that they don't have and that you can't have with them. And so for that reason, immediately gravitated towards dwarves, because dwarves are they're just better. Like, I would say a dwarf, their word is their bond. Like they're like, I gave you my word. And you're like, I get it. Whereas an elf would be like, I gave you some words. And you're like, what does that mean? They're like, so realistically, the first army was obviously going to be dwarves. And I would say a solid 1.5. Like every time I think about another army, I do a dwarf army just to like pay the tithe there. So I started with dwarves and then I went dwarves. And then I went with ogres, which are like big, meaty, still bearded dwarves. And then I went back to dwarves. And then I went beastmen, which realistically, if you think about the key feature of a dwarf being a beard, beastmen are all beard. And then now I'd run out of dwarves to do, which really Games Workshop does need to pick up their slack there, because I've done all of their Warhammer dwarves, I've done all of their ageofsigmar dwarves, and I've done all of their like Hobbit, Lord of the Rings dwarves. So I guess the only thing I was left with that wasn't a dwarf was the only thing better than a dwarf, which is a dead elf. So yeah. What was the question again? So for this project, I am collecting dead elves. So the whole vibe is that if there's one way I will accept an elf, it is as a soulless, mindless automaton stripped of all of its flesh and anything that could be used to describe it as pretty, beautiful, or like gnomish and all that jazz. So dead elves is the way to go. Now, again, immediately, if we're halfway through this project and Games Workshop releases a new dwarf army, I will immediately drop the dead elves, like into a volcano. Like I will take them out into the middle of the bay, just out here, and I will yeet them into nothingness in a heartbeat. A Tale of Four Wargamers, I loved it as a concept. It would have been better if everyone played dwarves, because obviously dwarves, being superior, are the best at fighting other dwarves. But yeah, sadly back then, the original Tale of Four Wargamers, both the 40k one and the fantasy one, no one played dwarves, which is, it's disappointing. And we are here to rectify that. That everyone else is playing dwarves in this, right? That's what I heard. So for my army, they've made a lot of spearheads for dwarves. Good stuff, Games Workshop. You absolutely are killing it. Lots of spearheads for dwarves. Unfortunately, for dead elves, they have made elf spearheads and they've made undead spearheads, but they haven't made dead elf spearheads, which is a real missed opportunity, I feel. Because there's a lot of demand there from people who are aware of how bad elves are and how good killing elves is as a combo. So if you put that together in a box, that would be a license to print money. Unfortunately, it has turned to me to be a license to print money for Games Workshop, because instead of buying any single spearhead, I've had to buy multiple boxes and combine them to create what should be a simple concept of undead elves. There was actually a dead unit, an undead unit featured a dead elf a long time ago in Warhammer Fantasy, but that's one model in a very expensive metal kit. I'm basing it off of a Soulblight spearhead. Unfortunately, I haven't bought the Soulblight spearhead because I need none of those models. So I've bought just a large collection of different types of elves, and then Graveguard and skeletons and a couple of Nagashas and multiple bits and pieces to kind of shove them in together to make dead elves. Now, if I was playing dwarves, none of this would be necessary. I just want to put that out there because those spearheads are perfection. I am a very balanced wargamer. Much like a dwarf with its low center of gravity is incredibly well balanced at all times and in all ways. Really hard to knock them over, just super good. So I love gaming, hobbying, painting just equally. They all bring me joy in the same way that seeing an elf die brings me joy. I think the real issue is that the reason elf hobbyists are the worst is that elves are functionally immortal, right? So they feel like they've got all the time in the world. So they never prioritize the other elements because they're like, I've got forever. Why would they need to prioritize things? And that makes them fundamentally bad people because they either focus on gaming or they focus on hobby or they focus on painting. They never really treat it as such. It's the same reason that in all of the books, elf characters are like, oh, it's so hard to enjoy the mortal races because their lives are fleeting. Meanwhile, dwarves are like, this human's rad. He's like gonna die in like 20, 30 years and I'm gonna live for 400, but this human is still rad. There's a difference. And so being a mortal myself, I like to enjoy all of the things equally rather than not making time for them and then maybe getting my head cut off or caved in by an axe or a hammer, which is what all elves and elf players deserve. That's not an admission of guilt. I just want to be clear. I have not done that, but my hobby is really like it's combining the three. So at the start, I love converting. So I've taken elves that arguably, if assembled normally, would be alive. I've slashed them up, torn them to pieces, really broken down their silhouette, and then replaced all of their skin bits, because obviously elves are so, oh, look at my beautiful skin. That's all gone. It's all bone and rotting flesh. Then, they're like, look at my pretty clothes. That's all completely destroyed, just absolutely like cloaks tattered, armor shredded. So they look janked up. And usually I paint with a really bright color scheme. But this time I've gone for a much more darker, deeper, muted one because I want them to look miserable. Like, I don't want them to look like the bright, shiny, happy elves. I want, when you look at them, to be like, that's what they deserve. That's what you deserve! Because that way people will know. And I think that's really important. So this is also going to be my first time using Pro Acryl, which I'm very excited by. My style of painting is like, I like the term maybe functional pretty. Because I am a dwarf, I want things to be functional and efficient because I'm not a fickle wanker elf that makes things overly complicated or uses magic as a way to bolster the fact that we can't actually just make a good crossbow. So what I've done is I go with a really simple base, zenithal, and then I use contrast, speed paints, express color, all of those ones to get my base colors down. That's nice, it's efficient, it's fast. And then I get to get that part, which I find to be the workmanship. That's if I was a dwarf working in the forges, that's what the apprentice would do. And then it would come to me to do my layers, my highlights, my edges, my detail, my effects, all of that kind of stuff. That's the stuff where I'm like, wah. So looking at the Pro Acryl range, that's where I've gone and like broken down my colors, layers, effects that give you that really beautiful final image on these dead, deserving, earless, skull-faced elves. Yeah.
Is there any particular colors in the Pro Acryl line that you're excited to try out?
Super excited. So I, first of all, to start building up with their purples. Really, really excited by their dark pinks and purples. That gave me a lot of joy. Also, being somebody who loves painting bright colors, and normally dwarves, bright, ostentatious, we actually like these things because we're going to appreciate them and like different holds. We're not just bright because we're a bunch of wanker elves that don't understand color theory. So I'm genuinely excited. The other set that that I definitely am not being threatened by, and she's definitely not just off camera with a slingshot full of rabbit urine, is the Rogue Hobbies set, because Louise is a friend of mine and she would never threaten me in a way that would make me need help. Anyway, she's super, I mean, she's not here, she's super lovely and she would never threaten me, but I'm very excited to use the Rogue Hobbies colors because they're nice and bright. And that excites me because I like that bright colors, you know, you add a little bit of browns or blacks to pull them down, you add a little bit of white to bring them up, and if you've got a good, strong, vibrant mid color that sits there, you can play with it. Whereas I find if you've got a really dark color, it's harder to go up and down from there, whereas if you just sit in the middle with a lovely heavy pigment, you can muck around with it. Again, as a dwarf player, that's artifice, that's skill, that's talent, that's things that elves and elf players don't possess. I think if you went to a runesmith and said, hey, what's the best stuff for you making a hammer to cave in the skulls of a bunch of elves and elf players, that runesmith would give you a list of the best things to use. And so Proacryl doing a signature series where they take artists, talk to them about the styles, the things, maybe the deficiencies in other paint ranges that they would love to bring together and put in one collection. That is genius, because it's like going to the runesmith to figure out how the tools and the things you need to build the runes, rather than just being like, here, we made more. And you're like, why did you make more? It's like, we just did. That's an elf way to do things. Like Warhammer showed up and I bought a box, and when the question was, what do you want? There was, and this is back in the days where it was like retro, high fantasy, bright everything. Like there was no grit, there was no dark, the bases were goblin green and gorgeous. The elves were terrible and the dwarves were fantastic. And so I got my first box, and it was a box of 8 little squat plastic dwarves, no elbows, no knees, no nothing, no worries. They were fierce and fantastic. And right next to them, in fact, on the shelf, I remember there being elves, and I got into a lot of trouble, and it's why I'm still banned from that Warhammer store, because I took all of the elf boxes, and when they were like, do you want these? I said no, but no one should, and he seemed confused, but they had a wood chipper out the front because they were doing some landscaping, and I just fixed that problem for them. Anyway, Warhammer Mount Gravatt in Brisbane didn't appreciate that. That's how I got into it. Like, I just want to be clear, I got into Warhammer because dwarves were rad, and then I could find ways to kill elves. Like if there's, like my fan fiction of, which disappointingly hasn't done super well, of Lord of the Rings, involves Gimli skinning Legolas very early on. And then when they get to the Mines of Moria, it's actually not a Balrog, it's just a big elf. Just a really big elf. Can't remember what the question was.